Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to this week's Q&A. I see we have a few people joining on the newer platforms that I signed up for, which is very cool. And I say this and mean it nicely. I don't really care where anybody signs up. I'm just very, very appreciative for the support. So Bitbacker, Patreon, Subscribestar, the YouTube's join feature, doesn't matter. I'm just very, very appreciative of the support, and I'm trying to put it all to good use. So anyway, let's jump into this week's Q&A. First up, over on the YouTube subscribe service, Matea Gilardi asked if I knew someone that's working on a simple, modern, and dedicated HDMI 480p to RGBS 240p downscaler. No, and it really makes me sad because all the solutions out there are complicated or expensive. So you have the Extrons, the Emoshas, and Super Emoshas, only certain older models that will do 480p VGA to 240p. I believe those add about a frame of lag. Then you have the ones, the Choreo TV ones, that are much cheaper, but it's kind of a pain to get set up. You got to flash it with the right firmware. There's some great guides out there, but it's not plug and play, I'll tell you that. And that, I believe, has about 2 frames of lag. And I believe you'll always have some kind of lag because I think it would require a frame buffer, but it's not a huge amount. But no, I don't know anybody that's currently working on one, and I really wish that they would. VGA or HDMI is fine because you could get some very cheap but good quality converters to go in either direction. In fact, I think HDMI to VGA converters, like the 10 DAC ones, are super cheap and work very well. But that's something that I would really want. And it's less important to me personally these days because the original goal for that was because the Game Boy Player software for the GameCube would only run in 480i and 480p, but not 240p. So my original quest for this was just so I could play the Game Boy Player in 240p. But now Swiss has the ability to launch the original software in 240p, but don't do it because if you have the ability to launch Swiss, you could just launch Game Boy Interface, which is the best stuff out there for RGB output. But I do realize that there's a lot of other reasons for that. 480p Dreamcast games that might feel more retro, so you want to play them in 240p. Some of the shmups that are on modern consoles that you might want to downscale. I mean, there's a long list of reasons why you might need something like this. So anybody that mocks it, ignore them, because there's a bunch of really great reasons for downscalers. And heck, just progressive scan on RGB monitor is enough for me. But sadly, there isn't anybody that I know of working on one. Certainly nothing announced. I just really wish they would, because I think that would, that wouldn't sell a million, but I think it would sell enough to justify the product, especially if you could somehow do it with 0 lag added. Not sure if that's possible, but if it is, I mean, that would be incredible, because then that would be the only solution out there that has no lag and could downscale. So sorry, that was just a really long 2.5 minute no, but I'll keep everybody updated if I hear anything. Now over on Patreon, MC Boys asked, have I heard anything from the people who got first round pre-orders of Woozle's Game Boy Advance HDMI mod? What changes, if any, are going to be made based on the additional testing and feedback? So I haven't really heard too much about the pre-orders. Happy Slappy Cow said that they're part of the pre-order group and haven't received the kits. But they should go out any moment now, and it would be a slightly longer delay if you wanted one of the cases with it. As far as what changes, so from my original video to that first pre-order batch, Woozle was able to add a couple of extra things. Nothing crazy, I think just some one extra feature and better scan lines or something like that. So, but it's something that everybody will get. It's not like some people will and some people won't. And as far as changes after that, so from batch 1 to batch 2, there were certain things about overall cost and ease of production, just stuff that's part of the overall process that I believe are being tweaked. So I don't know if that's going to end up being a change to things on round 2, but nothing would step down. So it's not like, all right, well, we found a way to make it cheaper, so it's only going to be 480p. Like, nothing like that. If anything, if there's any changes that would actually affect gameplay, it would be going up, not down. So, I mean, I don't think there's anything notable to mention at the moment. I guess we'll find out in a few months when we're not only the next round, but hopefully this would be the consistent round of that goes through. But both Woozle and Jason from Game Tech have done really everything anyone could ask for to ensure these things are made properly, that they get to the customer in good shape. So, as with all projects that are small, niche market stuff, there were delays, and it took a little longer than they'd expected, but that's because they really want to do it right. So, I get just as annoyed as everybody else when these projects are delayed, but pre-orders are going to hit any moment now, and the next batch should be coming sooner rather than later. And if there are changes, it's not going to be anything bad, and it might not be anything that's even noticeable to gameplay. Next, Reagan Kelly said that he recently picked up a PVM 1943 MD, which is an upgrade from his 13-inch Panasonic, but also older. He has a few questions. First, it doesn't have a service menu, and apparently all adjustments are done via pots inside the case. Yeah, that's kind of common. SNES and Saturn are centered well on screen, but Genesis seems shifted to the right. You can see the full picture, but there's a bit of a gap on the left. Is there anything you could do to fix this that won't push SNES out of center? No. I mean, if any of your cables have sync strippers in them, take them out, because that will shift it one way or the other. If you absolutely need a sync stripper, you should be using the Scart switch, and because that won't shift it either side, especially the newer ones. Normally this isn't a problem at all, but when you're talking about things where you have to open up the case and adjust pots to get centering, then it starts to be one pixel over might actually be a bigger deal. But if you're comfortable working on it, I would try bumping it over one, making sure that SNES doesn't get cut off, and seeing what happens. Maybe the Genesis will then be recentered. But overall, you just kind of got to live with it. And this is something that on all CRTs. So, if I really want to sit down and have a gaming session on my BVM, I'll tweak the geometry to that game, because that doesn't mess up with any of the other settings. It's not like I'll throw the whole console off, or the whole monitor off, but mostly I just deal with a little bit of shift or something on either side. Second, this monitor is one of the few PVMs that's RGB only and doesn't accept component video, so he hasn't been able to connect the Wii or PS3. Do component to RGB converters exist? Yes, and I'm giving you a little sneak preview here. Here is the latest edition of the Garo from the Behar brothers. So the original Garo, I thought it worked fine, but some people had issues with it. So this one's now re-released in an all-metal case, and on the inside, I believe they've tweaked a bunch of the components and the circuit to make it as good as possible. So this one will output either Scart, or VGA, which is good if you want to do one of those very cheap VGA to BNC cables for your monitor. And although I haven't tested this, and in fact I just took it out of the box just to be able to show you in this Q&A, I was kind of swamped and didn't have time to test this yet, but I will test it soon and put it up on a scope, put it up against the original Garo, as well as some of the other converters I have, because there's a few key digital ones out there. Some work better than others, some are built for functionality and not so much quality, but as far as I know, the Garo is the only one that's designed specifically for exactly what you're talking about. And I think I showed a video a year or two ago that showed the G-Comp switch with, for example, like your consoles, Wii, PS3, and I think I had something else in there, going into the Garo, then the Garo going into the G-Scart switch with all the other consoles going into the RGB monitor. So you can feel free to mix and match like that as well. And hopefully I'll have the review of that up within a few weeks. I'm just so backlogged, I got to finish everything else before I could even get to that. But I think that covered it all. Let me know if you have any other questions. Alistair asked, has there been any more developments in cleaning up the video on a Model 1 Mega Drive? Yes, and the only reason that info is not out there is just because I haven't had the time to update the site. But essentially, all you need to do is add 2 capacitors directly to the VDP on Genesis 1s. Voltar found this out, and in fact, his original theory I tested with a normal capacitor, and it didn't work. So that was one of the reasons why this took so long, is because We had to send stuff back and forth, and anybody that's worked with Voltar knows that sometimes he'll tell you it'll be done tomorrow, and 3 months later he's yelling at you for asking why it's not done yet. But then when he sent it back, in order to retest this, you really it's a little bit over intermediate. I think it's one of those things where if you do it once or twice and you get the hang of it, totally cool. But I was a little nervous trying it the first time because the only consoles I had access to at that moment were ones that were going to people, either for testing or people had sent me stuff so I could test on it and then send it back. So I asked Jose to test for me, and the trick is that you need to get this surface mount SMD capacitor right between the 2 pins on the VDP. So you lift RGB up and you slide this pretty much underneath. And then you got to scratch off some traces on the motherboard and then solder it to that. So it's a combination of the right cap, the right size cap too, so it's perfectly matched to bump up against the 2 pins. And you have to get it pretty much on the VDP, as close as possible. But once you do that, and then one more on the other side near the subcarrier, which is way less stressful, you basically just have to add it almost bumping up against the pin itself, facing out of the trace. And the few that we've done, so the 4 that we've done, 4 or 5, are great. Now you'll never get a perfect signal out of any Genesis. You'll never get a perfect signal out of any analog console. Eventually, when we all have 8K TVs and 8K scalers, you'll be able to see the interference a little bit more. But Genesis will always be a little worse than the rest, and especially Genesis 1s. But overall, out of the 4 or 5 that we've done, it's infinitely better than stock. And it's even better than, it's better than if you just lifted the subcarrier, but just from an interference point of view. So if you're just talking interference, way better than stock, and definitely better than lifting the subcarrier and not touching anything else. But everything else about it is worth it. So yes, you'll still get a little bit of interference, but the colors are now proper. Now it looks the way it should and never did. It's way sharper. So it's overall, in my opinion, if you're a big fan of the Genesis 1, doing the triple bypass and adding these capacitors are the way to go. At the moment, the current version of the triple bypass has audio that's pretty much equal to what's on the Genesis 1, but you're lifting the audio up off the board. And because of that, you remove a lot of the inherent noise that's coming through, like the hum or the buzz that you'll hear, especially on white screens like the Konami opening. So, you know, it's definitely, a lot of people, even a lot of the experts, sometimes miss the point of, you know, the Genesis 1 audio is fine. It is, but it's a little noisy. So doing the triple bypass is definitely my recommended solution because everything is all in one. At the moment, the Firebrand X has this very cool audiophile amp that you could put in. So if that was the case, I would use Voltar's amp and then Firebrand X's if you wanted to do that. And there may or may not be a Firebrand X edition of the triple bypass coming out in the summertime. I'm trying to get him to do that because I'm obviously a huge fan of his work, and I just think combining that stuff together would be cool. But either way, I mean, that's the full rundown on Model 1 Genesis. And I will try so hard to get to updating the site with pictures and letting people know all this. But the other thing is I would like to get more than 5 or 6 done. I mean, we got like 40 triple bypass installs total. And we got like 20 of them before I even talked publicly about it. Because well, I used to do something like test a couple of consoles and say, all right, I figured it out. And then I realized that was so dumb and I should have never done that. Luckily, nothing bad ever happened. But, you know, just because it works on a couple of consoles doesn't mean it'll work on all. So we're still testing, we're still going through, but I think this is the fix. And while we might find better ways to just tweak it a little bit more, it'll be rooted in this one. So if you take the time to do a full triple bypass, add these 2 capacitors, and you hear something else in the future, you would have still had to do this, and then whatever the new thing is. So you definitely feel comfortable doing it. As long, you know, I think we've gotten every model Genesis motherboard. We got VA6 from Japan. I did not get a VA1. You said you have a Japanese VA1, but we've tried VA3, VA4. So we're getting there. I think it would be safe to do on a Genesis 1, and if you do it on yours, please let me know. Sean Sally Lyon had a question about remotely powering on and off consoles. So with things like the Xbox and PS2, there are remote mods. I remember I used to have that installed into my Xbox because I used it as a media center, so I could use the remote control to turn it on or off from my couch. But for other consoles, he's looking for a different solution. I would look into things like network monitored power strips. That's what we use in the IT world, so you could plug everything in, just as you said, leave them in the on position, and then use an app or something to turn them on or off. I would just look into if there's any kind of inrush current issues into that. I don't think so, but I vaguely remember having a conversation with somebody about this because plugging it in first and then flipping the on button would give it a chance for the caps in the PSU to charge. It was something odd like that. So I would just do a little bit of research for each console that you're going to connect, see if anybody's done any kind of power testing, and go from there. But yeah, I mean, I agree. It's certainly something that might be useful. For me personally, though, I would only use that in something where like the newer consoles where you would use it for multiple uses, and it already has features where you could just have your controller sitting next to you and you're already on the couch, flip the input button, grab the controller, and power it on. But that's only my personal opinion. If you have a wireless setup and you want to do the same, I would just look into the IT stuff and see if you could find something inexpensive. Marco Vizzini had an interesting question, and I'm not sure if I know the answer to it, but I'm going to try my best. It sounds like he has a bunch of consoles connected to a manual Scart switch. So something like the Otaku switch or those Bandridge switches that I hate. Sorry. And he's using mostly RGB, but putting composite video into at least one of the inputs. Which that part of it's fine because most of these things, or all of the Scart standard, is designed for composite sync or composite video on pin 20. So that part's cool. It sounds like the Scart switch only has one output. So he's wondering what to do about when he goes between composite and RGB. So from there, he's going to a BNC adapter to go RGBS on the RGB monitor. And on the sync out of the RGB monitor, he's got a BNC cable going to composite video in. So it sounds a little complicated, but I think I'm grasping what this is. So that way, when you're switching between RGB, there's no big deal to as far as the functionality goes. And then you go to composite video, and then whichever inputs composite video, and then you just switch your monitor to composite. But the only question that I have is on all of these consoles. So whether it's the sync line or the composite video line, if you're going from the sync out of RGB to the composite in of composite, are you now double terminating that signal? So essentially splitting the signal. And even though you're not on the composite input, it's still being terminated, thereby you're still drawing twice as much from all of those sources. So my gut tells me that that's probably not a good idea, but I'm no Steve or Renee, so I wouldn't be able to give you the math as to why. My gut feeling is it's not worth potentially breaking any of these consoles just for this convenience. And I would go and get a very cheap composite video switch and go directly into the composite video port for that one. What would work is something like a G-Scart switch. And then you just use dual outputs. So one output goes to composite video, one output goes to RGB. That would work. I don't know about the automatic detection of the switch. I think that would work fine as well. Obviously, you'd only be able to have one console at all on at the same time. You couldn't treat it like a matrix switch. But, so yeah, I mean, if I were you, I would just go buy a cheap, just a super cheap $10 composite video switch. Or if you only have one console, maybe consider just putting that one console into the composite video input and then dealing with audio elsewhere. But although it might be fine, it just doesn't sound like a risk that I personally would want to take. So if I were you, I would probably go with the safer route. Silent Jet said, since it's getting harder to find good CRTs, they're thinking about going down the OSSC and flat screen path. And it sounds like a lot of TVs have problems with the non-standard refresh rate that older consoles put out. So the question is it possible to slightly underclock or overclock the consoles so they run at the standard refresh rate that a TV expects? Yeah, that's exactly what the dejitter mod is for NES and SNES consoles, and you have the potential to do that on all of them. But I don't like that solution because what you're essentially doing is modding your console for the OSSC, if you really think about it that way. And, while you have to have a solution for now, you can't just not play your games. You're essentially taking something that's going to be around for a long time. Your classic console that will always be revered as the classic 16-bit era console, let's just say, or 8-bit, whatever. And you're talking about modifying it for a device that has a definite lifespan. The OSSC is my favorite scaler, but whenever that FPGA chip that's on it goes out at end of life, which could be as many as 6 years from now, but there's going to be a point where that goes away, and the replacement is probably going to find some way to do something like this. Maybe built-in regeneration, so you could turn a frame buffer on or off. So, try it with it off first. If your TV is compatible, cool. If not, flip it on. So what you're essentially doing when you do things like the dejitter mod or all of these is you're modifying a console that's going to be around a lot longer than the temporary solution that you're modifying it for. So I'm not saying don't do it. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I want to make sure that people grasp what it is that they're doing. And I think if you're serious about gaming, it would be more beneficial to, like, if you've already spent a gazillion dollars on your favorite TV you've ever owned, you don't want another thing, you want a game on this TV, use a FrameMeister, maybe. It's more expensive, and it's got a frame and a half-ish of lag, but it works on every TV. Maybe use a RetroTink for now, because it's only 480p, but it certainly would get the job done, and it's compatible with everything. But I think another path to go down is just looking to TVs that are compatible. I just did that video on 2 cheap TVs, so if the LG one I've been using in my bedroom, which is perfect just as a crappy TV to watch some movies before going to sleep, seems to be working okay as a gaming TV. I've only clocked a few hours on it, but it seems okay. And then, of course, there's a bunch of really good gaming monitors and stuff like that. One is currently in pieces on my other table, which I'm working on a video on. So I would only use changing the clock speed of consoles, whether it's the existing dejitter mods or making new ones. I would only use that if you know that that's going to be the perfect solution for you today. And I believe they're all reversible. So I have a ton of friends that are streamers that have every intention of reverting that console back to stock once the next thing comes down. But buying the dejitter mod for now was exactly what was the perfect thing for them today. So it was a really long way of saying, yes, it's possible, but it might not be the best solution. I just thought it was worth taking the time to explain the whole thing. In case you were a developer looking to take the time to do these, maybe it's not worth the time to go through all that. Chris from Belgium had a couple of questions. First, his 2950QM monitor now has some geometry issues on the top and bottom of the screen. The image is bowed, but unfortunately there's no HBow setting, despite the fact that there's a VBow. Any idea on how I could tweak that? So I would try to find a service manual and see if there's pots on the inside, or maybe even a service menu you could go into. But I think that is a sign, if that issue's there now and it wasn't before, that's a sign of capacitors going. So you might want to just start thinking about doing a full cap replacement, and that is a huge job. You can go through with an ISR meter and try to figure out, or just a visual inspection and figure out which caps need to be changed. But I mean, like, even if you know what you're doing, it's a lot of caps and you have to disassemble the whole thing. So consider that a weekend project. So I would ignore it. I would first look for an easy solution, but know that if it is a cap replacement, if it needs a cap replacement and you mess with the geometry settings, you're going to need to mess with them again after you do the cap replacement. So if there's something easy, you could just bump a button and know that you'll have to reset it afterwards, maybe go for it. But I wouldn't, I certainly wouldn't go through all that trouble and find out then that the caps are really bad and that you're going to have to redo everything from scratch. So if you had the ability and the patience, which I got to admit, I think I lack the patience to do a full recap. Plan on spending a weekend, and then you'll have a monitor that you've just extended the life and the quality quite a bit. Next, he's looking for a simple PCB pass-through with a Scart connector on one hand and a D15 VGA 3.5mm mini jack connector on the other. Do you know if anything has been done? Yeah, man. What about the Scart to DVI thing that I worked my butt off on? Yeah, this current version of it, the one that I talked about, all you would need to do is get one of these, and then now you have Scart input, and then you have VGA and 3.5 millimeter on the output. Trying to get that in focus for people watching on video. And it even has the sync stripper and a low pass filter built in. So if you were going to, if you're going to use this for something like going from Scart to Extron Crosspoint, you could even get direct DVI to BNC cables. So you could buy these and then go right from the Scart to DVI, and then right from here directly into your Extron Crosspoint. And this would be a good idea for people that need the sync strippers on them, so like PS1 and stuff like that. If you don't need any of the features, and you're just looking for a very easy way to connect the pins, so you're not doing any kind of signal conversion, you just want to connect the pins. These boards, it's an open source project, and the boards are freely available. You could have 10 made from JCL PCB. You could have 20 made and have it shipped within a week for like $40, and then just only buy the Scart connector and only buy the DVI, and I guess maybe the 3.5 millimeter jack, and then just solder the connectors to the board, and then just jump little wires between the different pins that you need. So there you go. There's your, it would be probably the same or less work than adding all the components, but then there's your direct pass-through with nothing else but changing connectors. So also the other version of these are in the midst of being worked on. The new Scart ones won't be available till summer, but Component and VGA are coming soon, and there's a bunch of new features being implemented in that now make them many uses for the same device. So not only is it for the data path capture card, now even the current one could be used for going into an Extron Crosspoint at any resolution, but the future ones will be able to do things like the filtering on all resolutions and stuff like that. So I think that's the one, I think that's probably the best solution for you. Chris had 2 more questions. I just cut off the last one because it was getting loud outside and I didn't want it to echo through people's speakers. First, am I planning on doing any more interviews this year? Yeah, I really want to get back to doing those. I loved doing them. There's just a few reasons. First, I work every waking moment of the day, 7 days a week, and it's so hard to schedule it. And I'm not trying to complain. I really love doing this stuff. It's been hard for me to try to find some kind of schedule where I could just take the time out to say, all right, well, I'm definitely not going to be doing anything else for these 2 hours to make sure that I get this. So, and that's affected other things too, other people's schedules. I've been trying to get one of the developers from DataPath to do an interview, and he always says yes, and then we exchange a few emails, and he kind of disappears for a while. The other thing is, though, that I noticed that I need to, for the interviews to have the most impact, I need to schedule them around something else that kind of goes back to that. Otherwise, they won't get too many listens or views. And it's not about like getting views, making money, or stuff like that. There was just a few interviews I've done over the years that didn't get very many views or listens that I thought deserved a lot more attention, that I really loved doing. And I think it was because I didn't have a great way to promote it. And also keep in mind that for any kind of interview like that, where it's really just, even the ones with good cameras, when it's mostly talking, you get a lot more listens on the audio platforms like iTunes and Google Play or even Direct than you would on any of the video services, because people would rather just listen. But still, it made me feel really bad when some of them only had, 1,000 views on YouTube, and even if it was 5,000 downloads on other places, or even more than that, it's still just, I wish there was a way that I could promote all of these better, or just do a laid-back audio-only podcast or something. And then the last thing is I really would want to do some other, like another road trip style thing where I could, I would actually love to do like a road trip where I get a van and just drive around the country and possibly go other places and talk to everybody in person. But that's just so expensive. So who knows? We'll see how all that happens. But yeah, I really hope to get back to that. And your last question, am I planning on continuing the giveaways? No, but not by choice. So I loved doing the giveaways. I thought it was so much fun being able to connect people with stuff. And I think a lot of people that won enjoyed it the way I had hoped. Loved hearing their name randomly being called on a podcast and all that stuff. But the problem is that when you're on all of these platforms and you rely on them, you're bound by their rules. And Patreon, the company, not the interaction, but the company Patreon, is getting shadier by the minute. And even though they said that I was complying by their rules, at any moment it's their platform. They could just turn me off. Maybe they want to make an example out of me, whatever. It doesn't matter. And that's just terrifying right now because I'm trying everything I can to grow the site and everything around it. So if YouTube shut me off, if Patreon shut me off, that would be a huge blow. So I got to just, once YouTube started sending out the letters too about no giveaways, it's like, all right, let me, let me just play by the rules and not try to gray area my way into a loophole or something like that, which is essentially what I was doing. And some people were getting pretty shitty, kind of saying without saying that they were going to report me to New York for doing illegal giveaways. Nobody in the state of New York is going to give a shit about a $50 or $100 giveaway that's on a global podcast. That is, that's not at all what they're looking for. They're looking for gambling rings. But it still was annoying that, I guess, some of the haters out there are always looking to take their shots. So I just thought it was safer to turn it all off, which is depressing because I really loved it. But I want to find another way to do stuff like that. So if I ever do a live event where, like the last one I did at Brooklyn Video Games, everybody was welcome, but I had always known that was going to be more of a virtual live event. People show up on Twitter or YouTube and hang out that way. But any meetups, anything I do where the purpose of the event is people there, I'm definitely going to do some kind of drawings there. So, and maybe like make it $1 just so that people don't run up and grab 100 tickets. But it's going to be, I'm going to definitely do stuff like that. And I wish there was other ways of kind of doing stuff that was supporter focused. Because I could always just say, hey, I'm going to select somebody random from the comments, but the whole point of the giveaways, in my opinion, was to say thank you to the supporters. So I got to really find another way to do that, and I don't know how to do it yet. So anybody have any suggestions, please just contact me directly through any of the support platforms, and we'll figure it out. It's just got to be something feasible. Like I can't take a giveaway, mail it to Delaware where there's no state law, and then have a different website where you log in with your Subscribestar login. Like, there's stuff like that we could do, but that's insane for everybody. So, yeah, anybody has any ideas, I'm all ears. I miss doing it. I had a lot of fun with the spin wheel stuff. So, please just let me know. And I'm sorry that those had to stop, and I hope it's temporary, but who knows. Lars Olschlager said that he wants to build a do-it-yourself RGB splitter to connect a console to 2 displays at once. Do you have any suggestions for RGB audio amps or ICs? Maybe you could save me from reading data sheets for hours. Well, if you really want to build your own, I would suggest the THS7374, and then as long as it's just RGB, so RGBS, you'd be able to use that. But if you really... if you wanted something right now, today, you could just get Voltar's DP data path board, and one output would be Scart, and the other output is DVI. But once again, if you're going to an RGB monitor, you could just do the DVI to BNC connectors on one and Scart to the other. So maybe one Scart to the OSSC and the other one to the monitor, or maybe this is it. Maybe it's DVI to the capture card and then Scart to the monitor or whatever else. So I think there's a few people out there selling them. I think the people I know might be out of these, but right on the video capture section of my site, you could post. Or I posted the design files for these, so you could have the PCBs made and make them yourself, or even just modify it. But there's going to be more dual designs. So there's nothing wrong with this one. It does exactly what it's intended to do for 240p and 480i, but this is kind of an abandoned project by Voltar. He started working on it. We were supposed to do more stuff, and then he just said, forget it, have that. I'm just giving it away. I don't want to deal with it anymore. The future versions of all the ones that I've been working on, so this stuff, the 2 DVI products that I've been releasing open source, There's been a team of people helping out. They saw the potential for these in the same way that I did, and now the same way that you do with these. And we're just doing it one at a time, both for the purpose of sometimes the single adapters are actually the better choice for whatever reasons, but also because once these are all done and tested in their own individual scenarios, then we could circle back probably end of summer or something and have something like this with all of the new features. So works with every resolution, the proper sync stripper, because the one that I used was the LM1881. While there isn't anything wrong with it, you have the image shift by 1 pixel, and it's an older design. So the newer one that we're integrating in will have no image shift, might even have other uses. So my suggestion is maybe look for somebody selling the Voltar DP one just for now, and in the future upgrade to the one that we'll be putting out. Or I mean, if you have the ability to design your own, maybe contact me and help out with some of these. You could certainly, if this is really important to you and you need it now, you could certainly bump up the project that's most important to you and have that out immediately. So just let me know, if you want to help in any of those, or if not, just try to find these, and that should absolutely take care of your issue. And of course, you could always just get a G-Scart switch that has the dual outputs if that's the path you were looking to go around. Adam had 2 questions. First, he has some of the new G-Scart switches on the way and was thinking of selling his current 3.4 version. Can I think of any reason why he may want to keep the VGA out? The only reason is if you specifically have a device that works with 240p but requires RGB HV instead of RGBS. Most people will never run into that scenario. I actually know a few streamers that have pretty crazy setups that occasionally use that to make things that are normally not compatible with monitors work. It's a very long description and something that just ends in, I know a few people that need one, but not almost everybody would benefit from the features of the newer one over that. So if you're looking to sell it, let me know. I could probably put you in touch with somebody. But I think unless you specifically need RGB HV at TTL level sync, just like a VGA connector, there's no reason to keep the older one and just get the benefits of the new one. Second question, he's tried Agaro to connect his G-Comp switch to the G-Scart switch, which worked mostly fine, but he had some color issues. So once again, the new Garo may or may not fix that. I'll be able to test soon enough. But anyway, he was thinking of getting the new 8x2 G-Comp switch. Could he do the opposite? Have a G-Scart out to a ShinyBo Scart to component converter, and then into a G-Comp, which has dual output to CRT and the FrameMeister. Any reason for one over the other? No. But to be honest, if you're using a FrameMeister or an OSSC, you could have dual inputs. You could have component going into the component input and RGB going into the RGB input. So why not just use both individually? I don't think there would be much signal degradation going through all of those. I know a lot of people that have it set up exactly the way that you described. And as far as gaming goes, there's definitely not a noticeable difference. If you're streaming or doing capture or, anything where you're zooming in a lot on the image, you might be able to see a little bit of like something, but overall it's a pretty darn good solution. But I mean, why use the Garo at all if you don't need to? Or the ShinyBo? Why not just utilize the inputs of the processors? And since both of them have dual outputs, both the G-Comp and the G-Scart could have one going to the processor and the other going directly to a monitor. So that's just something to think about. But as far as would the opposite work? Sure. No reason why it shouldn't. Steve and I tested the ShinyBo. It's the best generic converter. But don't forget that it's a generic converter. So there might be some scenarios that it's flawless in every way, both visually and on a scope. And there might be other scenarios where you're like, it's not quite as good as the original. Maybe I see something. But I mean, as far as a generic thing, it's as good as you could ask for. I did know a few people that switched completely over to HD Retrovision, because once the 8x2 G comp was released, they realized they only really played like N64 and Saturn, and then all the other consoles they had were component. They were more modern gamers with Xbox, PS2, and all that stuff. So they just switched totally over to component, so they didn't even have to worry about it, knowing that the HD Retrovisions are designed specifically for those consoles, so you don't have to worry about any of the weirdness of going through some kind of generic converter. So I think I covered all ground. Let me know if I missed anything. Jason D asked if anyone interviewed Kevtris about the Mega SG. Surprised not to see any audio or video interviews. Not that I know of. I'm very annoyed about that. I'm obviously a giant Kevtris fan, and I would have loved to have done a great interview and a video together, but I get snubbed again 2 years in a row by Analog. So I just decided I'm not even gonna talk about it at all. I don't understand why or what happened, but whatever. But I would love to talk to Kevtris about it. I just would like to find a way to do it that's most productive, because don't forget too, a lot of stuff Kevtris is under NDA. So a lot of people complain about the interviews that I do with him, like, why didn't you ask this? Why didn't you ask that? As if I would forget to ask a super important question. It's just a lot of his answers are, I can't say, I don't know, I'm not, can't really talk about that. So I would love to get in front of Kevtris again. Heck, I'd love to go hang out with him again. He's a very fun guy. But no, nothing in the short term. I would really love to get out there and pick his brain again and see what's going on. But nobody paid attention. And that drives me nuts, because I think he and Ernesto, there is no Analog without them, right? The very nice, beautiful case designs are Ernesto. Obviously, the motherboard and the FPGA cores is all Kevtris, and Chris is the marketing guy. So it makes me sad when bigger publications talk about Analog without mentioning Kevin. So yeah, I agree. I'm also surprised not to see any interviews, and I hope to talk to Kev again soon. Kenny Rydell had a pretty interesting question. He was wondering if I knew how much lag the DataPath Vision has. So he wants to set up his Mister for streaming, and he's deciding if he should use the DataPath Vision to capture analog video or go with the Elgato HD Pro to capture HDMI. What do you think? So I think what you're trying to do is game on your monitor, and then from there also stream it. And that's an interesting thing, because all capture cards are going to have some kind of lag. And of course, then your monitor might as well. And whatever crappy monitor I have here tends to have a lot. I don't even know if I put it in game mode, to be honest with you, because I don't game on this computer at all. But that's an interesting thing. And I think once I'm able to test lag on a monitor I know is very low lag and consistent, I'll do my normal test where I do a CRT and then use a high-speed camera. I'll be able to report back on that relatively soon. But to be honest, all of the pros would never consider doing that, regardless of it's an Elgato or a DataPath Vision. Everybody would set up something so that whatever they're playing on is extremely low lag or zero lag. So I know a bunch of streamers that get the 8-inch PVMs just because it's so much easier for their setup. No one likes playing on a tiny little 8-inch screen when you could play on a giant, bigger screen, but I know a lot of people that went the distance to make sure that their gaming setup, while it might not be the best quality, has zero lag. I even knew a few people that was able to split a signal because they took RGBS out of, like, let's say a Super Nintendo. So they have a C-Sync cable, and then they just soldered a composite video pin, an RCA connector to the bottom of the motherboard, so you're not drawing two currents from the same thing, because one pin is C-Sync, that's going to the RGB cable, then the composite video pin is going separate, and they actually game on a CRT with composite video while streaming RGB. Because while no one likes to look at composite video, the overall experience of zero lag over the original, that is the original experience, is the best way that you could play the game. So I've known a few people over the years who really wanted to get into streaming, who their on-site solution was composite or S-video, and their streaming was RGB, just to solve this issue. So great question. I also prefer lower lag cards because the way I do my any of the podcasts, Q&As, or even the bigger videos is I take the live real-time HDMI out of my camera, which I'm looking at now, and I send that into the capture card, and then I do the clap test. So I just, clap, and then I put that file in Premiere and slow it down so that the sound of the clap matches perfect, and then I just keep changing the delay in OBS. So the longer the delay, the more annoying all this stuff can be, especially with interviews. So, while it's not essential to the work I do, having a low lag or low input lag for the capture card is also important. So if you don't hear something by summertime from me doing that test, please remind me and I'll do it again. Or if you have the ability, go for it and do it yourself. But that's a good question. And that is my suggestion if you're streaming, is unless for whatever reason you have to do it that way, I would have a monitor or a CRT dedicated to what you're looking at and not the computer that you're streaming it on. Dave Phipps said he's getting an SSD S3 for his US TurboGrafx 16. He understands there are issues between the FrameMeister and the SSD S3. Do these same or similar issues exist with the OSSC? So the only thing that I want to make sure that we're clear about is, as long as you're using one of the newer SSD S3s, or if you fixed the video signal coming out of the older one, the problems aren't with the SSD S3, it's with the TurboGrafx or PC Engine's signal. So, it doesn't matter what the solution is, SSD S3, DB booster, anything else, internal Voltar mod, doesn't matter. That's the compatibility issue, is the weird signal of the PC Engine itself. So yes, those issues would exist with the OSSC, but it's going to come from any original console. The upper graphics is that incredibly expensive device that outputs 720p. That's, if TurboGrafx is your favorite system, getting an EverDrive and then that upper graphics, or I think even the newest version of the upper graphics is supposed to do ROMs as well. But point being, if this is your favorite console and money's no issue, look into that. But you're going to drop $450 after shipping. But then you wouldn't need a scaler, and you'd have no compatibility issues. You could even still RGB mod the TurboGrafx on the inside. So if you wanted to stream out the HDMI and game on an RGB monitor or something like that, that would be an option. But just for use with the OSSC or the FrameMeister, I mean, it's tough. There's a bunch of threads on Shmups that go into detail about problems people have had and how they're able to fix it. So, I mean, I really liked the SSD S3, and obviously, I like TurboGrafx and PC Engine. So my suggestion would just be to pick it up and then see what you could do after the fact to try to tweak and get compatibility issues up. Well, that's it for this week. For any newcomers, any questions you have at all, just post in the newest post wherever you found this video. So it doesn't matter what platform you're on, just find the latest Q&A and post your question there in the comments. I turned the comments off on each individual video on YouTube because this is really focused around the supporters, and it's really something I want to give back to you. And then I make them live to the public about a month after they go live to the supporters, just kind of as a fun courtesy. But just find whatever the latest post is. The way all this stuff works out, I can't really go back to any of the older ones. And if I missed your question, it's almost always a mistake, so please just post again. In whatever the latest Q&A is on whatever support page that you subscribe to. So thank you so much for all your support. I hope to have more videos coming out soon. I'm a quarter to 3/4 of the way done with 3 different videos about stuff I'm very excited about, but I just need the final pieces of the puzzle to come in before I'm able to finish them. So hopefully, at the very least, you're going to have one very cool one in April, and probably a few more shortly after to follow. So thanks so much for your support, and I'll see you next week.